Hi everyone, I'm Heather Crosby, founder of YumUniverse, your home for an inspired plant-based and gluten-free diet. And today I'm here with my friend Valerie Bolon, who's a professional chef here in Chicago and former Top Chef contestant. I've asked her to be here to show us basically how to use knives, what are the differences between knives, and what are some chopping techniques that we all should know.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
Sure. Thanks for being here, Val.
It's great to be here. Well, I'm thrilled to be here to talk a little bit about knives.
Okay.
Knives obviously are very important in learning how to cut and in the entire cooking process. It all starts with a really good knife. The first most important knife to have is a chef's knife. Your chef's knife is your knife that you use for pretty much everything. Every day, it's your everyday knife, and the most important part about using your knives is maintaining the blade, maintaining the edge, maintaining a sharp knife. So if you have one chef's knife that is always sharp, you're pretty much good to go.
Okay.
Your knife is probably about a 6-inch knife.
I still love my 6-inch knife.
And you can still use your 6-inch knife.
Okay.
No problem. It is actually a lot safer to use a large knife where the blade is longer and it encompasses a larger surface area when you're cutting larger portions of food. So it's
For
a little
example,
bit
like
safer.
the celery, right? Like you were showing me before.
So if I take celery and I just want to cut it in half, you can see I still can cut it at the base of the knife, but have the remainder of the blade to the point where I can see it. You actually do have more control over a larger knife.
Okay.
Believe it or not. But it does take some getting used to, no doubt about it.
Right.
So, but we'll show you that. We'll keep talking. And your knife is sort of it's like buying a new pair of shoes. You know, they're yours and you don't want other people to use them or wear them because you've sort of conformed them to your own self. And
You've
it's
bonded
yours.
with your knife.
Yeah, it's very personal. Your knife is a very personal possession. And it's sort of an extension of you. So take good care of your knife is the point. And you know.
How do we do that?
The best way to do that is to have what we call a steel. Now most of you who have knife blocks in your kitchens will have one of these. It should come with your knife block. Sometimes they're flat, this is called a diamond steel, sometimes they're flat like mine, and sometimes they're just round like a rod.
I've seen the round ones, yeah.
So I hold it sideways, I take my knife, and I place it flat so that it's actually touching the steel. I take my finger and I slide my finger just at the base of the spine. So that shows you the angle in which we're going to have to drag the blade along the steel. So before I start dragging the blade down, I remove my finger.
Take your finger out.
Important note, remove all fingers before sharpening your knife. And I gently drag the knife from heel to toe all the way up and down the blade. 10 times on each side. That's a that's a good rule of thumb. 10 times on each side. And
you say to do this every time you use your knife.
Every time
you want to try to remember to sharpen it.
Every time you use your knife, and that way the blade will constantly be sharp. So when you're done with that, it's important to then take a towel and just with the blade away from you, making sure your hands are in the clear, just sort of wipe the blade once or twice, just to make sure you don't have any metallic bits that have remained on the knife.
And do it away from food.
Do it away from food. It's, you know, yes, exactly.
Away from food.
Away from food, and away from your fingers, more importantly, away from the fingers. But that is how you maintain the edge on a sharp knife, on your chef's knife.
So I know that a lot of people tend to buy the block of knives, right? And you get the pack, the block of knives, and there are so many different types of knives in there. Explain the difference to us. What's in there? How do we use them? What do we use them for?
Well, you know, the idea is that knives can be very expensive to buy them individually. So we buy them in a block all at the same time. They're all the same brand, make. So they're all going to have like the same weight, heaviness. Some knives are very heavy, some knives are very light. And that's a matter of personal preference. So when you go to a store and you buy a knife block, you know, hold the knife in your hand. Feel it. Is it heavy? Is it light? That feels good, that doesn't feel good. The angle of the handles are often very different. So first
find what works for you.
Find what feels good, what feels comfortable. You only need 3 knives, in my opinion, for everyday cooking. So your chef's knife, your serrated knife, and your paring knife.
And a paring knife.
So a paring knife is basically just a smaller version of a chef's knife in the sense that You know, you can kind of cut whatever you want with it in smaller amounts. So it's for cutting maybe cherry tomatoes or foods that are really
little
small.
things.
Little things. So first rule of thumb, so to speak, how in holding your knife, how I always explain it to people is to stick your hand out as if you're shaking my hand, right? So if you shake my hand,
yes,
this is the position where your knife is going to fit.
Okay.
So I'm going to remove your hand and place my knife.
Okay.
And that is a good approximation of how your
it feels.
hand. Right?
Place the knife in here.
So
Let me see what we're dealing with.
It's sort of right in there.
Okay. And is my wrist it's kind of loose, right?
Yes.
Got to be loose.
So the key is, you know, oftentimes you see people holding a knife with their finger up here. And that is a knife no-no.
No.
Because what happens is you don't have a lot of wrist control when you play, and sometimes we do it, you know, out of habit and don't realize that we're even doing it. So if you find yourself with the finger on top of the blade,
take your
finger and slide it to the other side. So you should be holding the knife.
Okay.
It's like a gentle, soft grip, so that if I came by, I can wiggle the knife. But when I start slicing it, it's a little bit firmer.
Okay.
But you should be able to move your wrist up and down.
Okay.
Right? So that's another problem that people tend to have when they first start cooking or chopping, is that they hold the knife really, really tight. And what ends up happening is that your knuckles turn white and your wrist hurts, and then your shoulder hurts, and then your other side hurts.
Yeah, and because you're so tense, you probably cut a finger off or hurt yourself. So
exactly.
Relax, breathe.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we have to breathe and gently grip the knife. When we're slicing something like a carrot, right? So I'm gonna cut this down into a piece.
Where are these fingers? Yeah.
So I'm going to start off with a small piece because it's often a lot more difficult to slice something that's smaller than larger, right? So the most important thing is to keep the fingers away, the opposite fingers away from the underside of the blade, for obvious reasons. So we don't want to slice our fingers off. So what they teach us in culinary school, what they taught us, was the egg, right? Imagine that you are holding an egg under your hand.
Okay.
So imagine this tomato is an egg, and I'm holding the egg under my hand.
Okay.
Right? So if I hold the egg in my hand, I place my hand on the cutting board, remove the egg, then that is the placement of my fingers. Okay, and it's really, really important because the tendency is for us to want to hold the food really tight with our fingers clenched together. And what happens is the second I lift the blade up and return it down, my fingernails are directly under the blade, right? So the secret is to guide the knife
with
along
like these
your
guys,
knuckles.
right? Yeah.
So that flat part of the knuckle, the ridge, right there, that's what that part of the hand is designed for. Okay, I'm convinced of it. So that's what the purpose is, of bending the knuckles, so that the fingers are actually nowhere near the bottom of the blade.
Okay, they're away from it.
We're guiding the knife along, right? We're not shoving the food into the blade. We're guiding the knife along the food. I'm going to show you a slicing movement, and keep in mind that these things require a lot of practice. And when you first start slicing, it takes time to really get into the motion of the rhythm of it, and what it's supposed to feel like. And it feels awkward at first, but you know, what I advise people to do is buy a bunch of vegetables, carrots, celery, onions, cheap vegetables, and practice chopping. Practice chopping your different cuts, put them in bowls, throw them in a stock pot, cover them with veg stock, and make yourself a minestrone soup. You know, so it doesn't go to waste, but you still get practice with your knife skills. So the idea is hold on to your knife, nice and loose, fingertips curled under the top of the food. Anytime we have food that's round, which most food is not perfectly flat, so we really want to try to make the food as flat as possible so it's not moving all over the cutting board. So sometimes what I like to do is actually make a slice, especially when I'm just practicing.
Nice. I do this too.
Cut this in half, and now my food
it's not going to roll.
It's not going to move.
Yep.
Exactly. So I'm going to take my fingers just at the top of the food, curl them under, take my knife, and I'm using about the center of the blade. I'm trying to use the whole length of the blade.
Okay.
So some people it's very hard and they just try to go like that.
At the tip.
At the tip. right? But you have this huge blade for a reason, so use it, right? And the same thing with trying to do it at the back of the blade. You can't really get a motion if you're just using a small part of the blade. So we're going to try to do that using the entire length of the blade. So what I do is I start at the back, start at the front, and I sort of do this
it's like a rocking
motion. Exactly.
Beautiful.
So down and away, down and away, down and away. Same thing here, down and away. So nice and
sounds
slow,
good.
right? You can hear it.
Yeah, it's very rhythmic.
Right. So if you're doing it the wrong way, or if you're doing it with a dull knife, you won't hear that. You're just going to hear crunching of food, and it's going to be a big struggle.
Okay.
So you should hear that fluid sound. Okay, so it's down and away, the whole arm. You see my whole arm moves. It's not just my wrist and my hand. So I'm relaxed. You know, you take a deep breath. The body should be really relaxed when you're slicing, not tense, because that's how you cut yourself.
Yeah.
So nice and relaxed.
I can do this. I can do this.
That's right.
I can do this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're doing it with something that's round and you don't cut it flat, it's the same thing. You just have to be a little more careful. So same thing. Fingers curled under, and you have to lift the knife a little bit higher, which is why you don't want those fingers under there. Yeah. Because the higher you lift it, the more room there is for the knife to move. So you gotta keep that finger, and I usually use my sort of my middle finger there. That's my guide.
Okay.
Right? That's my guide as I come down and away, down and away, down and away, down and away. And another key point, which I failed to mention earlier, was having a large cutting board is also a very important part. Because, so my rule, I have lots of rules, as you can see.
Val does have lots of rules.
Rules can be bent, though.
You know, and you can pick and choose. Make it work for you, but just listen to her rules and see what works for you.
Just humor me for a moment, if you will. There are reasons behind my rules. So the biggest thing for me is having a big cutting board. I know people like to use these tiny little cutting boards because, you know, maybe you don't have a lot of space. A bigger cutting board is always better. It is always safer. It's better. Because look at what happened. I already sliced a half a carrot.
It's already filled up.
And it's already filled up half my cutting board. And it's dangerous when you start slicing food and see what happens. You come back over and all the food is under the blade. So
you would prefer that I provided you with a larger,
even larger than this.
Really?
This is a good standard size.
I use this just fine. So that's where bending the rules come in.
Even larger.
I'll scoop stuff inside.
I had my druthers about it. My cutting board is almost the whole size of my counter.
I'm sure it is.
It's huge. And it's thick and it doesn't move, and it's you know, it's very cool. It's great. The other rule is that if you place your knife diagonal, your knife should not be longer than your cutting board.
That's a good one.
So if your cutting board is this big and your knife is hanging off the edge, how are you going to slice your food? Yeah. You're going to be slicing your counter.
It's a good way to measure it. And I remember once Val shared a really great tip with me as well. If you have one of those cutting boards that doesn't have grippers underneath of it to keep it steady, didn't you wet a paper towel and fold it and put it underneath, and it sticks the cutting board to the counter so you don't have the slippage, which is really helpful.
Yes, that is a very, very helpful tip. So the most important thing, yes, you don't want your cutting board to move. For obvious reasons.
Safety.
Safety first. Safety first.